Mason had never considered himself a lucky man. From the moment he could remember, life had been a struggle, an endless fight for survival. He had never asked for much, but he had always hoped for a better future, one where his daughter Lily could grow up in a world that didn't feel like a constant battle. But the harsh reality of his life had set in long ago, and now, standing in the sterile hospital room watching his daughter fade away, Mason realized that nothing in life had prepared him for this. Lily, his bright-eyed little girl, lay in a bed, pale and fragile, connected to machines that beeped with a rhythmic, mechanical persistence. It was the sound of life slipping away. She was dying. The doctors had given him the worst news possible. The disease was too advanced, the treatments too expensive, and there was nothing more they could do. He had no money to pay for the expensive, experimental treatment that could possibly save her, and he had already exhausted all his options. Mason wasn't a man of great means. He worked as a janitor in a rundown office building, scraping by paycheck to paycheck. He was used to struggle. But this was too much. He had already sold his car, borrowed money from everyone he knew, and begged the hospital for a discount. But nothing worked. Nothing would save her. Sitting by her side, his heart torn in two, Mason felt more helpless than he ever had in his life. He had been able to protect her from everything else, the world, the cruelty of it, but now there was nothing he could do. She was slipping through his fingers, and he was powerless to stop it. That's when the phone call came. He had been sitting at Lily's bedside for hours, barely able to keep his eyes open. The low hum of the machines was the only sound in the room, but then the phone buzzed, breaking the silence. Mason looked at the screen, surprised to see an unfamiliar number. His first instinct was to ignore it, to let it go to voicemail, but something in his gut told him to answer. He picked up the phone and pressed it to his ear. "Hello?" His voice cracked from the lack of sleep and the overwhelming weight of grief. "Mason, this is Catherine Sinclair," came the voice on the other end. It was smooth, controlled, and full of authority. Mason's heart skipped a beat. Catherine Sinclair. The name alone was enough to make anyone stop in their tracks. She was a billionaire, the CEO of one of the largest corporations in Texas, a woman whose name was synonymous with power and ruthlessness. She was the kind of person who could make or break someone's life with a single phone call. Mason had heard of her, of course, but he never imagined she would have any reason to contact him. "I know about your daughter, Lily," Catherine continued, her voice calm, almost too calm for someone who was talking about a child's life. Mason's mind went blank. How could she possibly know about Lily? How could she know about his desperate situation? What do you mean?" Mason's voice trembled as he spoke, his mind reeling from the shock. "I know about the situation with your daughter," Catherine repeated. "I know you don't have the money to afford the treatment she needs, and I know you're running out of time." Mason's chest tightened. He didn't know what to say or what to think. This wasn't a coincidence. She had to be watching him. "Who are you? Why do you care?" Mason asked, his voice rough with disbelief. Catherine's voice remained unchanged, steady and commanding. "Because I can help her, Mason. I can give her the treatment she needs, the treatment you can't afford. But there's a catch. A very simple one. I'll save her life. But in exchange, you will do something for me." Mason's heart began to race. Help her? How could someone like her help him? What did she want from him? He was a janitor, a nobody with nothing to offer. "What do you want from me?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "I need you to father my child," Catherine said without hesitation. The words hit Mason like a freight train. He couldn't process them. He couldn't understand what he was hearing. Father her child? The CEO of Sinclair Industries, the most powerful woman in the state, wanted him to father her child? It didn't make sense. He must have misheard. What are you talking about?" Mason asked, his voice trembling with confusion. Catherine's tone didn't change, remaining calm and calculated. "I need an heir, someone to inherit my empire. And you're the man I've chosen. I'll provide the treatment for your daughter. I'll make sure she lives. But you will come to me and you will father my child. That's the price. It's simple, really." Mason couldn't breathe. His mind was reeling. Was this a joke? It had to be. He didn't know this woman, didn't know why she would ask something so outrageous of him. But as the minutes ticked by, the reality of the situation began to sink in. He thought of Lily, her small hand in his, the way her tiny fingers grasped his so tightly, as if she were clinging to life itself. She was his world, his reason for everything. And now, this woman, this stranger, was offering him the chance to save her. But at what cost? "Why me?" Mason asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why not someone else? Someone else who has money, who has power?" "Because you have nothing," Catherine replied, her voice still cold and unemotional. "You have no wealth, no connections. You are desperate, Mason, and that makes you the perfect candidate. You'll do anything to save your daughter, and that's exactly what I need. You'll do this, or you'll watch her die. The choice is yours." The words hit him like a slap. The choice was never his to begin with. He wasn't in control of this situation. He wasn't in control of anything anymore. All he had left was his daughter, and she was dying. He couldn't lose her. Not like this. "I'll do it," Mason said, his voice barely audible. "I'll do whatever it takes. Just save her." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line before Catherine spoke again, her voice soft but final. "Good. I'll arrange for everything to be taken care of. You'll come to me tomorrow and we'll discuss the details. But remember, Mason, once you accept this, there's no turning back. You'll be bound to me in ways you can't even begin to understand. You will be part of my plan, and your life will never be the same again." Mason's heart sank as the weight of her words settled over him. There was no going back. He had made his choice. He had agreed to her terms. His life and his daughter's life were now in the hands of a woman he barely knew. And as the call ended, Mason sat in the dark room, his hand still clutching Lily's, and he realized that the price of saving her life was something he would never be able to repay. He had already lost everything. Mason couldn't sleep that night. His mind kept replaying the words Catherine Sinclair had said. "You'll father my child." The absurdity of it still clung to him like a foul odor, and no matter how much he tried to push it aside, it remained there, festering in the back of his mind. He couldn't believe it. This was all happening too fast, too unreal. But as the night dragged on, the bitter reality of the situation sank in deeper. He had no choice. Lily's life was on the line, and Catherine had the power to save her. The decision had already been made, and now all that was left was to follow through. The next morning, Mason dressed in a daze. He barely registered the movements of his own body as he got ready. The last thing he wanted to do was leave Lily's side, but he knew he had to. He couldn't back out now. He had to go to Catherine's office and see this through, no matter how much it made his stomach twist. He arrived at Sinclair Industries just after noon, the towering building looming in front of him like a monolith. The glass and steel structure was a testament to Catherine's wealth and influence. He was nothing but a speck in a world so much bigger than himself, and the truth of that hit him harder as he stepped through the revolving doors. The lobby was pristine, the kind of place where the air felt too clean, too cold. It was everything Mason wasn't, everything he couldn't afford. As he approached the receptionist, a woman in a crisp suit looked up, her face unreadable. "Mason," she said, her voice cold and professional. "Ms. Sinclair is expecting you. Please follow me." He nodded, feeling the weight of her gaze as she led him through the maze of hallways. Each step he took brought him closer to Catherine, and with each step his nerves grew tighter. What was he walking into? What would happen when he saw her again? He had agreed to the deal, He had already made the choice to save Lily. But now, the reality of what he was doing hit him harder than ever before. When they reached the office, the receptionist knocked once, then opened the door, stepping aside to let him in. Catherine was seated behind a large desk, a glass of water in front of her. She didn't stand to greet him, her gaze lifting only slightly as he entered. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, and cold. There was no warmth there, just business. "Mason," she said, her voice smooth, like everything she did was planned down to the last detail. "It's good to see you've come. I trust you've thought carefully about our agreement." Mason didn't know how to respond. His tongue felt heavy in his mouth, his mind racing with conflicting thoughts. He wanted to scream, to tell her how wrong this all was, how insane it seemed to father her child as a trade for saving his daughter's life. But he couldn't. He was trapped, and the only way out was to accept what she was offering. "Yes," he said, his voice low and strained. "I've thought about it." Catherine's lips curved into a small, satisfied smile. "Good. I'm glad you're clear-headed about this. I don't like to waste time, Mason, and neither should you." She stood up from her chair, her movements graceful, predatory even. There was an air of confidence about her that Mason couldn't ignore. She wasn't just a woman of wealth. She was a woman who controlled everything around her. And now, she controlled him, too. "We'll get straight to the point," she said, walking around the desk and stopping in front of him. "You'll do exactly as I say. There's no room for hesitation. I've arranged everything for your daughter. You don't have to worry about that anymore. What you need to focus on is this: our arrangement. I will ensure Lily gets the treatment she needs, and you'll provide me with what I need in return." Mason nodded, swallowing hard. He felt small, insignificant in her presence, but he had no choice. "And how does this arrangement work?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Catherine's eyes gleamed with something Mason couldn't quite place. "We'll begin immediately," she said, her voice smooth, unbothered. "There's no point in delaying. You'll come to me when I call for you. You'll do exactly what I ask, and once the child is conceived, I'll make sure Lily's treatment is taken care of. The details will be sorted out as we go along." The weight of her words hung in the air, suffocating him. This wasn't just a transaction. This was her taking control of his life, of everything. But what choice did he have? "What happens after?" Mason asked, though he was already dreading the answer. "After this is done, Mason, we both get what we want," Catherine replied. "You get your daughter's life, I get my heir. You'll be bound to me in ways you can't begin to understand, and once this is over, I'll make sure you have everything you need, money, resources, whatever you want. But don't think you'll be able to walk away from me easily. You'll always be a part of my world now." Mason's stomach turned. He had no illusions about what this deal really was. Catherine Sinclair wasn't doing him a favor. She was using him, manipulating him. But she was right about one thing. He had no way out. Lily's life was on the line. There was nothing more important than that. "I understand," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'll do it. I'll do whatever it takes to save her." Catherine nodded, her expression unreadable. "Good," she said simply. "Now that we've got that settled, we can begin. I'll arrange for you to meet with my personal physician tomorrow to finalize everything. As for Lily, I'll have the necessary treatment scheduled as soon as possible." She turned away from him, her posture straight and composed, like she had already moved on from him. He was no longer important, just another piece in her puzzle. And that was it. He was nothing more than a pawn in her game. But he had no choice. The deal had been made, and now he had to live with it. The days that followed were a blur for Mason. Lily's treatment began almost immediately, the doctors working tirelessly to save her. With each passing day, Mason watched as her condition improved. Her cheeks regained some color, her breathing grew steadier, and her eyes, Those bright, inquisitive eyes that once sparkled with life slowly began to shine again. It was a miracle. Or so he tried to convince himself. But with each improvement, something else darkened within him. He couldn't shake the weight of what he had agreed to. Catherine's words echoed in his mind, cold and unrelenting. "You'll be bound to me in ways you can't understand." The reality of that promise settled over him like a shroud. Mason had always prided himself on being a man of integrity, someone who held on to his values no matter how hard life got. But now, he felt as though those values were slipping through his fingers. He was no longer the man he used to be, the man who had spent every waking hour trying to give his daughter a better life. He was now part of Catherine's world, a world where morality was a luxury and power was everything. As the weeks went by, Mason found himself drifting further away from Lily. The time he spent with her, watching her recover, was bittersweet. He loved her more than anything in the world, but the deal he had struck with Catherine was taking its toll on him. Every time he looked at her, he saw not just the daughter he had fought so hard for, but the cost of saving her. He couldn't look at her without feeling the weight of the bargain, the price of her life. Catherine had kept her promise. Lily was alive, and that was all that mattered. Or so he told himself. But what kind of father was he if he had to make such a deal to save her? What kind of man was he knowing that he had sold a part of himself to Catherine Sinclair, a woman who had everything but still wanted more? He was becoming someone else. He wasn't sure who that man was yet, but he knew one thing. He didn't like him. The relationship between him and Catherine became more intense as the days passed. They met frequently, though never in public. Each meeting was a reminder of how small and insignificant he had become in her world. She controlled everything, his life, his future, and even his relationship with Lily. Every time they met, Mason felt the grip of her power tighten around him. She was always calm, always in control. She never showed any sign of weakness. And yet, in moments when Mason least expected it, he saw something else in her eyes, something cold, something lonely. It was fleeting, a brief glimpse, but it was enough to make him wonder if there was more to her than the ruthless businesswoman he saw on the surface. But it was just a moment, a fleeting thought. Catherine wasn't someone who allowed weakness, and certainly not when it came to business. Mason had no illusions. He knew exactly what he was to her. He was a tool, nothing more. The weeks turned into months, and Mason's world continued to spiral. He was trapped in a life he never wanted, caught between the love for his daughter and the price he had paid for her survival. He tried to focus on Lily, on her recovery, on the hope that he was doing the right thing. But the more time passed, the more he realized that the damage he had done wasn't just to himself. It was to her, too. She would never know the truth, never understand the depths of the bargain he had made to keep her alive. But Mason would carry the weight of that secret for the rest of his life. He had no choice but to. Lily deserved a chance at life. She deserved happiness, a future free from the shadow of this twisted arrangement. And yet, he couldn't help but wonder if, in some way, he was already ruining that for her. The more Catherine pushed, the more Mason's sense of self slipped away. He was no longer the man who had worked tirelessly to provide for his daughter. He was no longer the man who had sacrificed everything for her future. He was a man drowning in guilt, living in a world that wasn't his own, and he knew deep down that there was no way out. He was bound to Catherine now, and she had no intention of letting him go. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Catherine was never going to let him leave. No matter how much he hated himself, no matter how much he wished he could go back and undo everything, he knew he couldn't. He was too far gone. And so was Lily. He had traded everything for her life. Everything. And now, he was just a pawn in a game he couldn't control. The realization was crushing. He had done the unthinkable to save his daughter, but in doing so, he had lost himself. And worse, he had lost Lily, too. She would never know what he had done for her, She would never know the price of her survival. And as the days went on, Mason found himself wondering if it was all worth it. As the months passed, Mason's life became a monotonous routine, a life he had never imagined for himself, much less for his daughter. Lily's health had improved drastically, and Mason clung to that fact as the only thread of hope in a world that had grown increasingly foreign to him. But with every smile from Lily, every laugh that reminded him of the child he had almost lost, Mason felt a pang of guilt that only deepened with time. She was alive, but at what cost? The thought of Catherine was never far from his mind. She had kept her end of the bargain, providing Lily with the best possible treatment, ensuring her survival. But every time Mason thought about the deal he had struck with her, he felt a sickening sense of betrayal, not to her, but to Lily. He had given up his integrity, his sense of self, to save her. And now, as she recovered and blossomed back into the child she once was, Mason realized that he had lost something far more precious than just his dignity. He had lost his own sense of who he was. The moments with Lily were bittersweet. He would sit by her bed, hold her hand, and reassure her that everything was okay, but every time she smiled at him, it felt like a lie. She was too young to understand the price of her survival, too innocent to know the cost of the treatment that had saved her life. And that, more than anything, tortured Mason. The truth that he couldn't escape, the truth that loomed over him like a shadow, was that Lily would never be the same. He wasn't the father he used to be, and the relationship between them was no longer the same either. It was tainted. It had been bought at a price, and Mason could never undo that. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Every time Catherine called, every time she requested a meeting, Mason felt the weight of his decisions pressing down on him, suffocating him. He was no longer in control of his own life. He was just another pawn in her game, a tool she used to get what she wanted. And yet, there was always something in her eyes when she looked at him, something that made him question everything. Catherine was a powerful woman, used to getting what she wanted without question. But every now and then, Mason would catch a glimpse of something else in her gaze, something softer, more vulnerable. It was a brief moment, gone before he could fully comprehend it, but it made him wonder. Was there more to Catherine than the cold, calculating CEO he had come to know? Was there a person behind the power, a woman who, too, had her own struggles, her own loneliness? But the thought didn't last long. Catherine's business-like demeanor always returned quickly, and with it, the chilling reminder that she held all the cards. As much as Mason hated himself for what he had done, as much as he resented the way Catherine had manipulated him, he knew there was no way out. He had signed away his future the moment he agreed to her terms. There was no escape. Catherine made sure of that. She was always a step ahead, always reminding him of the deal they had made, of the price he had paid. And yet, every time he thought of walking away, of telling her that he was done, that he couldn't do it anymore, he remembered Lily, her face, her fragile body, and the fact that she was still here, still alive because of the very bargain he now loathed. But no matter how many times he reminded himself of this, it didn't change the fact that he had sold his soul to Catherine Sinclair. The moment he had agreed to father her child, his life had changed forever. It wasn't just the physical act that haunted him. It was the emotional toll of what he had allowed himself to become. A man who had once prided himself on doing the right thing, on standing by his principles, was now nothing more than a tool in someone else's game. And as each day passed, Mason couldn't help but wonder if Lily would ever know the truth. Would she ever find out what he had done to save her life? Would she ever understand the choices he had made, the sacrifices he had made for her? And would she hate him for it? The guilt gnawed at him. It was a constant companion, a shadow that followed him everywhere, no matter how many times he told himself that he had done what he had to do. The weight of the secret was suffocating. He couldn't live like this forever. He couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine, that he was fine. Every time he looked at Lily, he saw the lie in his own eyes. He was no longer the man she thought he was, and that broke him. Catherine, meanwhile, showed no signs of slowing down. She continued to control every aspect of his life, every aspect of Lily's life. Every time he thought he could break free, Catherine would tighten her grip. She was always there, always watching, always reminding him of the deal they had made. She had gotten what she wanted. She had her heir, the child she would use to solidify her empire. But Mason was still a part of her plan, still bound to her in ways he could never escape. He was trapped. He had sold his soul to save his daughter, but in doing so, he had lost something far more precious than his dignity. He had lost his future, and worse still, he had lost the man he used to be. There was no way out. The deal had been made, and now he had to live with the consequences. Mason looked at Lily one last time, her smile wide and innocent as she played with her toys, unaware of the dark bargain that had saved her life. He smiled back, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. It never would again. Mason had been living in a fog for weeks, moving through his days like a man sleepwalking through his own life. He went through the motions, showing up to work, visiting Lily at the hospital, meeting with Catherine when she called, but everything felt hollow, like he was no longer in control of his own existence. The person he had been before the deal, the man who worked hard for his family and prided himself on his integrity, was a distant memory now. What had he become? The realization haunted him every waking moment. He had sold his soul for his daughter's life, but at what cost? What had he really saved her from? He couldn't bear the thought of her finding out what he had done to keep her alive. She deserved a better father than this. She deserved someone who had fought with his heart and soul to protect her, not someone who had made a bargain with a ruthless billionaire to secure her future. But that was the price he had paid. The more he thought about it, the more Mason realized just how trapped he was. Catherine Sinclair had promised him everything: Lily's health, a future for his daughter, but in return, she had claimed him as her own. There was no escaping her, no running away. Every time he thought about walking away, about telling her that he couldn't do this anymore, the thought of Lily's smiling face, her bright eyes, and her fragile body in that hospital bed stopped him. She was alive because of what he had done. She had a future because of his choices. And that was the only reason he stayed. Catherine had made sure of it. She had tied him to her in ways he couldn't begin to understand, using his love for his daughter to control him, to manipulate him into doing her bidding. Every time he tried to distance himself, every time he thought he could take a step back, Catherine would tighten her grip. She had always been a woman of power, of control, but now she was playing a different game with him. He was no longer just a tool for her to use. Now, he was a part of her life, a part of her world, a world that had become more suffocating with each passing day. It was ironic. She had given him what he wanted. She had saved Lily's life. And yet, he felt like he was drowning. He couldn't breathe in her world. The more time he spent with her, the more he realized just how cold and calculating she was. She didn't care about him. She cared about power, about control. She had never seen him as a person, only as a means to an end. And that's what hurt the most. He had given her everything, his dignity, his pride, his soul. But it was never enough. Catherine was always looking for more. She always needed more. The realization hit him like a punch to the stomach. She didn't just want him to father her child, she wanted to own him. She wanted to control him, to break him until there was nothing left but her will. And she had succeeded. But Mason was done. He had made his choice, and he had saved his daughter. He had given everything for her, but now he realized that it was time to take his life back. He couldn't keep living in the shadow of Catherine Sinclair. He couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine, that he was okay with the man he had become. He wasn't okay. And he knew deep down that he would never be okay again if he didn't find a way to reclaim his own life. It was time to face Catherine, to confront her, and to finally take control of his own fate. He had made his deal with her. He had paid the price. But that didn't mean he had to stay bound to her forever. That didn't mean he had to let her control him any longer. The thought of walking away terrified him. He had never been a man to run from anything, but this was different. This wasn't just about him. It was about Lily, and about the future he had promised her. He couldn't betray her. Not now. Not after everything he had done to save her. But the truth was, Mason was more than just a father. He was a man. And he wasn't going to let Catherine Sinclair strip him of that. The next day, he went to her office. His heart pounded in his chest, the weight of what he was about to do pressing down on him. He had no idea how she would react, no idea how this would all end. But he couldn't go on like this. He had to stand up for himself, for Lily, for the life he had once dreamed of. When he entered Catherine's office, she looked up at him from her desk, her eyes cool, calculating as always. "Mason," she said, her voice smooth and disinterested. "What can I do for you?" Her words felt like a slap. He had been nothing more than a tool for her to use, a means to an end, but now he wasn't going to let her control him anymore. "I'm done," he said, his voice firm, unwavering. "I'm done playing your game." Catherine's eyebrows raised, her expression unreadable, but Mason could see the flicker of irritation in her eyes. She didn't like being challenged. She didn't like losing control. "What do you mean?" she asked, her tone dripping with thinly veiled threat. "I'm leaving," Mason said, his chest tight with emotion. "I'm taking my daughter and I'm leaving you. You got what you wanted. You've used me and now it's over." For the first time since he had met her, Catherine looked genuinely taken aback. Her face didn't show panic or anger. It showed surprise. She hadn't expected this. "You can't walk away from this," she said, her voice cold, a warning beneath the surface. "You're bound to me now. This isn't just about Lily. This is about something much bigger. You think you can just leave, that everything will go back to how it was?" "No," Mason said, stepping closer to her. "But I can try." Catherine's eyes narrowed, her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't move, but Mason could feel the tension in the air between them, the unspoken battle raging in her mind. For a moment, neither of them said anything, the silence between them deafening. Finally, Catherine spoke. "If you walk away, Mason, you'll lose everything. You'll lose Lily. You'll lose me. You'll lose yourself. You'll never be free of me." Mason looked her dead in the eyes, the weight of everything he had been through settling over him. He had already lost everything. But he wasn't going to let her take his soul, too. "I've already lost everything," he said, his voice unwavering. "But I'm done. I'm done with you." The finality in his words seemed to hit her harder than anything else he had said. Catherine stood still for a moment, studying him, before she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "You'll regret this, Mason. You'll regret walking away from me." But Mason wasn't listening anymore. He turned his back on her, on everything she had ever represented in his life, and walked out of the room. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. But for the first time in a long time, Mason felt like he was finally taking control of his own fate.